Hey, this is Dominic, and this is your home for the cutting-edge conversations on optimizing your personal performance, lighting up your sex life, and living a purpose-driven life of your own design.
These are the topics that Dominic and I have both struggled with in our own lives and still don't always get right. This is Brian. Welcome to the Great Man Podcast.
You know, one of the episodes that you guys say that you remember the most was episode number 122 with Ben Aldridge called Finding Your Potential Through These 43 Challenges. Now, if you don't remember, Ben was just an average guy living a fairly mundane existence who became bored with his life. He started craving that feeling of inner fire, so he made the decision to turn his life into a game. He dedicated a year of his life to pursuing 43 crazy challenges, like learning how to pick locks, solving a Rubik's Cube in under a minute, memorizing a deck of cards after seeing it only one time. That year turned his black and white life into one of living color, finding joy, mystery, and excitement in a life that was previously rote and predictable. Now, you guys have told us that you love that episode because it inspired you to get more curious and creative about how you could create your own challenges that could expand your life so that you could discover and live that great man within you. Well, how about we take it a step further? What would happen if you dedicated a year's worth of time not to 43 different challenges, but to one big, hairy, audacious challenge? Well, Michael Young, one of the leaders in our Great Man Mastermind, decided to answer that question and answer the call. On January 1st of 2020, Michael set out on a grueling year-long mission to jump rope 1 million times at the age of 54. That's right, 1 million jump rope skips at the age of 54 in an effort to see what he was capable of while also raising $25,000 for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society, which is near and dear to his heart because he's a two-time leukemia survivor. So in this episode, we break down Michael's journey of how he dreamed up such a massive challenge, how he found the courage to begin, the grit to persevere when things got tough, and the discipline to see it all the way through. Guys, this interview serves as a textbook for you as you venture to take on any meaningful project in your life that requires dreaming, courage, discipline, and ultimately ongoing execution. So who is Michael Young? Michael is a leadership coach. He's also an anchor, a leader in the Great Man Mastermind. In his one-on-one leadership coaching work, he specializes in helping people make big transition in life. And Michael spent 3 decades working for one of the largest healthcare institutions here in the United States called Cigna. And he's made that transition successfully into the second chapter of his life. He's also a 2-time leukemia survivor, like I just mentioned before, and he's also a rabid Philadelphia Eagles fan. So in this episode, we break down the anatomy of executing on a big challenge over a sustained period of time. We talk about how to embrace the void that you may experience in your life when a major chapter in your life closes, like leaving a job, leaving a relationship, right? And not knowing what the next thing is. We talk about the power of publicly declaring your big goals, right? Like verbally stating, I'm putting 1 million jump rope skips on the board this year. Watch me, for accountability purposes. We talk about the major difference that it feels to be respected versus being admired. And the difference between the two is how you inspire people, right? You may know the experience of being respected, but there's a big difference in being inspiring to others and feeling that sense of admiration. And then finally, Michael talks about the key difference between asking this less effective question of what do I want to do versus who do I want to be, and allowing the who do I want to be to define your goals, your actions, your big challenges. Enjoy this conversation today on the anatomy of executing on a massive challenge featuring Michael Young. Michael, man, we planted this seed about a year ago of you coming on this show and talking about some of the super inspirational things that you have done over the course of your life, and in specific, what you did last year with the 1 million jump rope challenge. But before we get into any of that stuff, man, it's such an honor and a pleasure to have you here as one of our brothers who's on the journey, who's in the mastermind, who's one of the anchors. So welcome finally, as I know you're a passionate listener of the podcast, welcome finally to being on the podcast as one of our special guests.
Yes, thank you both for having me. My first podcast, and I know I couldn't be in better hands than Dominic and Brian.
I believe, Dominic, wasn't Michael one of the inspirations for the podcast originally?
Was he?
He's an inspirational seed in a lot of ways. And I think that there was a topic that we had done maybe on Discerning Dick. And Michael, I could be misremembering this. But I remember, Dominic, you telling me something about like Michael Young wanted to hear about X. And like maybe we should do a podcast. That's my memory.
Michael's the kind of guy who kind of like gives you a call on the side and lets you know all the great things that you're doing. You know what I mean? He's like, he's one of those guys that says, hey, I saw this email that you sent out, or I heard you talk at this event, and this really made a difference. You are one of those guys that like lets a person know when they're doing something well. So I would not be surprised if we talked about some topic that Michael was like, I want more of that. And I was like, hey, why don't we do a fucking podcast about it?
I never get that from Michael. What am I doing wrong? That's actually not true. Michael does do a very good job of that, and it is appreciative. It feels like this moment right now, which feels like a nice, warm, tight, but not too tight hug.
All right. If we were in person, we'd absolutely be doing the hug.
Yes.
But since none of us remember the details, let's go with that as what happened, and then we'll fill in a really nice backstory at some point.
I like it.
Yeah, man. One of the things that we're doing in the Great Man Mastermind right now is a 90-day journey around identity, right? This concept of like, who do you believe yourself to be, and how much of your identity have you chosen? How much of your identity has just been defaulted to you? And there's some severe implications of that, because your identity, who you believe yourself to be, directly affects how you think, what you feel about yourself, and the actions that you take. But one thing I know about you, Michael, is that deep in your core of your self-concept, you are a Philadelphia Eagles fan, born and bred, and like you have not missed a game in something like 30-something years. What's the stat on that?
I have not missed a game probably going back into the 70s, other than a few when I was recovering from my leukemia.
Yeah. Wait, so you go to the games, Michael, or you didn't miss it in terms of watch it?
I go to every home game, and over the last 10 years or so, I've tried to go to at least one away game every year.
Wow. I've always been terrified of Philadelphia fans, the Phillies, the Eagles, because they're so rough. But I look at you and you're like this like calm, wise like version. Do you change? Like when you go to tailgate, do you change into one of those Philly fans?
Not quite all the way to one of those Philly fans, but there is a story that I am not proud of, that I once yelled at an old lady who was giving me some crap. And my brother was like, well, who are you?
Every Eagles fan has like a real deep shadow side that comes out. And like Michael, as you'll get a chance to meet him and listen to it, like is like the nicest, most put together, like compassionate man you could ever hope to come across. So the idea of you yelling at an old woman at an Eagles game is kind of blowing my mind right now. But
again, not one of the things I'm most proud of. I was fortunate enough that my away game in 2017 was the Super Bowl in Minneapolis. And what encapsulates Eagles fans is on the way out of the stadium, obviously everyone was euphoric. And an Eagles fan yelled, "If people thought we were hard to like before, wait till they get a load of us now."
That's so
like,
true.
that is exactly it.
Oh, man. So, Michael, we're going to dig in on some of your incredible life experiences. But before we do, I know you made a request, because you always like to do things a little bit differently. And instead of waiting to the very end of the episode to do some thank yous, I think you said you wanted to pop them at the very beginning of the episode. So why don't you take this opportunity to express your gratitudes in whatever form feels good for you, man?
Sure. Thanks, Tom. When you talk about my identity as an Eagles fan, that's just a small part of it. It's a passionate part, but still a small part. My identity is really driven by my family. So I just want to say thank you to my wife, Carolyn, my daughters, Allison, Julia, and Cynthia, and my grandson, Christopher, even though he can't comprehend all that much at 18 months old. But they are the fuel that drives me. They inspire me. They're always there, influencing me, whether they know it or not. And everything I've done has been with them in mind and a source of energy. So I just wanted to make sure I say that at the beginning. And we'll talk about my million skips, but a special thank you to my daughter, Julia, who made it all happen behind the scenes with Instagram and GoFundMe and all those things that I had no idea how to do until she let me. So I just wanted to say thank you to my family, and then also a big thank you to the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. That was a tremendous help, inspiration along the way, and that's led to some great work that I'm going to be doing with them this year and beyond.
Michael, you mentioned, and I haven't heard this before, when somebody has thanked their family or talked about their family, but they're a source of energy for you. Can you just touch on that?
Brian, when I say that, a way to really have you feel it is to say that I want them to be proud of me. And I want them to, as they're going through their life and facing situations where they want to make sure they capture the joy, or they want to make sure they can work through the challenges, that they can rely on inner strength for themselves, but also an example that I've set for them. I've seen my dad handle this. I know I can do it. And we can get into some of the details, but all three of my girls, my wife, Carolyn, like they've been through a lot and they've handled it well, and just makes me proud. So that's really the source of energy that I described.
Thanks for that.
Awesome. So Michael, in 2020, you decided to take on this crazy idea of doing 1 million jump rope skips over the course of the year and raise $25,000 for the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society. Why the hell did you decide to do that?
I needed something big in my life at that point for me. I had left a corporate job in May of 2019 after 31 years. And the way I described that is I wasn't running away from that. I was running towards other things. But as the course of 2019 unfolded, and I went from a corporate world where things were so structured to essentially zero structure, I just found myself searching for, like, what is the balance? It was really fun to live in a zero structure world for a few months, but quickly realized that is not the long-term path for me. And I struggled to find the balance. So as 2019 was coming to a close, I really was reflecting and meditating on what is it that I could do that would help trigger some of that, and really tap into other things that are core and central to who I am and what I've been through. So I'm a 2-time leukemia survivor. And I thought, what could I do that would raise awareness for blood cancers, and obviously also some money? And what would be big and unique? And I really thought about a whole bunch of different things. None of them really felt inspirational to me. And then ultimately, as it came close to the end of the year, I thought, I'd like to jump rope, and you don't hear much about that. And I said, that's my thing. And the reason I picked that is because that was my tip of the hat to what I went through and what others are going through in their chemo treatment. So I wanted something big. I wanted something difficult that created that metaphor. So I then was trying to fill in, like, what number of skips would be big. And I started to do the math, and I started at 250,000. And I thought, that just doesn't sound big. And then the math of that didn't really inspire me. And then I went to 500,000. And then I said, well, why not go to 1 million?
If you're going to do 500,000, you might as well do 1 million.
No one wants to say, wow, that's really cool. That guy's doing 500,000 jumps.
This feels like you're playing like poker or blackjack at a table in Las Vegas, where you're like, it's not real money. It's just chips. And you're just throwing skips like that. You're like,
right, exactly.
500,000 more. What's the big deal?
Yeah. But I know exactly what you're saying, Michael, because it's kind of like, someone who's making a big deal. It's like, hey, I'm going to go do a half marathon.
Right.
Yeah, that's cool, but it's not a marathon.
Not a marathon.
Like I've done a half marathon, but but a marathon is the real deal. So exactly. I get it.
So I landed on 1 million, and then I was like, that sounds cool. That's going to inspire me, and hopefully it'll inspire others. And then I started to backfill the math, but I kept reminding myself the story. Like, so to break 1 million apart, 3,000 on 333 days, giving myself days off, 1 or 2 a month. And I wanted to be a year-long journey. And I decided that I would do 3,000, no more. And I made up the rounding for the extra 1,000 because it was a symbol and a tribute to people who are going through chemotherapy. And when you're going through chemotherapy, if you're tired, you still need to show up. If you feel better that day, you still need to show up. You don't get to do more or less chemotherapy or other treatments just because you feel better or worse. You need to show up when it's your time and do it. And so I thought that feels right to me. And that was one of the things that inspired me and had me do it almost every single day.
Did you have those days? I mean, so you had a few days of break. You said once or twice a month. It doesn't seem like a whole lot. Did you have those days where you didn't want to do it? You felt hurt? Like, how was that journey?
The way I describe the journey, Brian, is like early on, when people saw me at the end, they were like, wow, you can do all 3,000 without missing. Like you make it look easy. Well, that was like watching anybody who is at the apex and not necessarily seeing the story all the way through and the trials and tribulations along the way. My first day of jumping, I couldn't do more than like 30 skips in a row without missing. And it just got, my legs, after the first day of jumping, my calves were so sore within hours. The second day, so January 2nd of 2020, I was even worse. I woke up on January 3rd and I couldn't even walk. And I thought there might not be another day if I don't take a day off already. So here I am, the third day into my journey, and I have to take a day off.
You know what's really interesting about that, Michael, is I think about your story. It reminds me of Corey Muscara's story. And Corey is, he's been a 2-time guest on our show. He wrote the book, Stop Missing Your Life. He's a meditation teacher that's very well respected. And the beginning of his journey, I think he was like 22 or 23, he went to Burma to do 6 months of silent meditation. You're talking about they shave your head, you wear the cloth, you sleep on this tiny little foam mat that, like he said, you could squeeze your fingers together and feel the bones in your fingers between the mat. Like, it's very uncomfortable living environments. You eat very little and then you meditate like up to 20 hours a day. And he said that it became so painful for him in the first like 7 to 10 days that he was ready to pull the trigger and leave. And he was going to make up some story about how he contracted malaria or something like that, like to come home and save some face. But it seems like there's this theme that during this like hero's journey, which is kind of what you went on and like what Corey went on, is that like there's a test that comes almost immediately where it's like, holy shit, what did I just get myself into? And you question everything. And like you said, there may not be another day of jumping. Did there come this moment of reckoning for you of like, I may just have to bail on this and eat crow and feel ashamed about that? Did that ever cross your mind for even a split second?
Absolutely. And I didn't do it intentionally, but in retrospect, I think I was playing it safe by not really making a big deal or putting this out there publicly until I got into February. I thought that I had the grit to do it. I wasn't sure, but I wasn't sure my body could do it. Yeah, and I was a runner, so I thought, I'm in shape aerobically, but had no idea just the toll it took on my legs. And the way I describe it is, on any one day, you could do it. But when you stack the days one at a time, end on end, it's like my legs felt like they were a cable. And every day there was one more crank of tension on the cable. And at some point, I wasn't sure whether the cable was going to snap or not. But certainly it was a drudgery physically and mentally early on, and then got past some of those early challenges. And I thought, I can do this. And then I began to put it more out there on social media, tell people about it, all of the things that said, I'm in this for the long haul.
How did that change your experience of the challenge by getting it out there?
It tapped into so many other things for me, Brian, because people who know me will relate to this. I like to consider myself a humble person, and to go out there and say, look at me, look at what I'm doing, was a challenge for me. And so this, again, was a symbol for many other things in my life of pushing myself out there. And I kept reminding myself, I'm doing this, but I'm doing this not for me. I'm doing it for awareness of blood cancer, raise money. I'm doing it to inspire people. So I kept fueling myself with that.
Yeah, so it sounds like there was a huge, huge shift from going by me, like this is about me, to through me. Like this is happening through me, which is like in a lot of the work we do, we talk about that transition. And it sounds like this was one challenge in which got you there.
Yes.
For anybody listening that's thinking about, I wonder if I can do 1,000,000 jumps. I thought the same thing. And so, Michael, I don't think I heard about you doing this until maybe, I remember it was early spring when I first heard about it. And I was like, okay, 1,000,000 jumps. And you told me the math and you said 3,000 jumps a day. I said, okay, cool. I wonder how hard that is. So I got my jump rope out and I went and I did 300 jumps. After 300 jumps, I said, this is not for me. This is just 300. So like, it's kind of like in my mind, I had like, oh, it's a jump rope. It's not that hard. You can rip through these pretty quickly. But what you said in terms of stacking them day after day after day, I was like at 300. I'm like, that's enough. This is not for me.
It's like 25 to 30 minutes, right, of jumping.
Right. The actual 3,000 skips was averaged about 25 minutes, but there was a range depending upon how I felt on a given day. And it took me as much as 30, never less than like 23. Then there was the commitment to the stretching before, the post stretching, lots of ice along the way really got me through it.
If you don't do that, then like you never hit your million. Let's actually dig deeper on some of these other like more crucial elements of the success of your mission. And I think I want our men to listen to some of these real seemingly subtle, but crucial moments of decision that allowed for accountability, allowed for commitment. For example, you said in the month of January, like you knew you had the grit, but you didn't know if your body could actually follow through on it. And after the month of January, like you recognize, okay, your body can handle this. So I'm going to be more public about it in February. One of the things I learned about from Tim Ferriss to make these like big changes in your life or to go after these big things is the power of declaring it publicly, because then all of a sudden there's accountability. Now, for some people, that's terrifying. Like declaring something publicly is actually more terrifying because it's like, if I fail, then I'm going to be humiliated. For me, it was always like, if I'm going to declare, I'm going to take 50 days off of watching television or Netflix. I'm going to take the first 90 days of this year and not drink alcohol. Declaring it was actually the thing I needed in order for me to be like, okay, it's a done deal. Cause my ego is too fragile. It was weird. I was using my ego. My ego's too fragile to fail publicly. So as soon as I say it out loud, I was using my ego against me to like execute on following through on something like this. So how did it shift for you when you made that declaration in February much more publicly? Like, what was the shift for you, energetically speaking, when you went public with it?
From day one, I was public with my family, so I felt like that was going to keep me going. But when I went broad public, I was really intimidated and didn't know how people would react. But the commitment really was something that inspired me further. And just like, I'm showing up because people are now asking me about it. That inspired me to do daily Instagram posts because people wanted to follow my journey. And then it was like, there's nothing that's going to stop me at this point. And I even started to make backup plans that if I were to get injured or for whatever reason couldn't do it, who would I pass the baton to? Because this was happening one way or another. But the public declaration was a big part of it because people began to count on me. The notes of, wow, this is really cool. Like, it was never truly about the money, but as people started making contributions, it just felt real. And I just had this overwhelming desire and burning need to make sure I finished the mission. And one of the things we talk about in our Great Man Mastermind is not playing small. And when I was setting the financial goal, in some ways it was more challenging than the million skips because I wanted to make that goal. And I had no idea what type of support it would get more broadly than just friends and family. So originally I was aiming, I said maybe $10,000 will be the goal. And I felt really good about hitting it. And Dominic and Brian, your voices were in my head from our retreat. Like, don't play small, like aim bigger. And then I thought 15, then I was like, no, I'm going $25,000, like is a lot of money. I'm aiming for that. So there were multiple elements to it beyond just the jumping.
That's one of my favorite parts of the story is the number that you set and how you ended up achieving it. So I've said this to you a number of times, but for our listeners, it's going to be their first time who hear it. You had a $25,000 goal and you're jumping month over month, January, February, March, April. I mean, you're going through the year, showing up every single day. It's so inspiring. You know, I see you on Instagram all the time, just like doing the work. You know, I contributed a number of times along the way. And then in early December, I went to your GoFundMe page or whatever it was, and I looked at your progress, and it looked like you were at $11,000 towards your $25,000 goal. And I was like, wow, you know, I would have thought by now, like you were probably within like your final 10%. I thought the ball would be at the 5-yard line, and you just kept showing up and doing the work. How did that story end up finishing?
Yeah. So a little bit more of the backstory there is remember, this is in the context of the pandemic starting and lockdown and people losing their jobs. And at that point, I made a conscious decision to back away from really pushing the money. And I just prayed and hoped that ultimately it would take care of itself. But originally I had plans to be out there jumping in parks and public settings. And just, I created these little business cards that people could just take a picture of the tag, and it would lead to the website, like, where in the world is Michael jumping, to let the body take care of itself. But when the pandemic started, I made a conscious choice to just back away from that. It didn't feel right in the context of what was happening across the world. But it was discouraging. As you said, Dov, I was about $12,000, and it was early December. And what I realized as I was trying to get some publicity is, it's a cool story, but nobody wants to talk to you when you're 437,000 jumps on your way to 1 million. You talk to me when you're close to the finish line. So as I got into November and December, I was sending notes to the new local news stations, newspapers, any place that I could find to say, this might be a good human interest story, especially at that stage of the year, holidays, pandemic. And then finally, one of the local stations said, I'd love to run this story. What are you doing Saturday morning? Can we come to your house and film you jumping? And I was like, absolutely. And so most of my jumps were in my garage, and the neighbors, as they walked by, I don't know if they thought I loved jumping rope or what the deal was, but certainly the news van parked in front of my house, watching me jump with the camera and everything, like, got people's attention. And when that story broke, I had some friends who just put it out there on LinkedIn and other channels, and that's what caught fire. And on a goal of 25,000, we finished over $56,000. And almost all of that happened over the last 2 or 3 weeks as the excitement built.
Wow. What a journey. It sounds like, Michael, there was the fundraising and the, let's call it the marketing yourself element of this, which you just went through. It also sounds like there was a relationship side of things. I know your daughter helped with some of the social media, and you're talking about your neighbors walking by and seeing Michael jumping rope again. How did your relationships evolve through this process?
Yeah, it's a great question, Brian. I'll start with my relationship with my jumping. So every day, 333 days, we were spending quite a bit of time together, and it became something that I relied on, and it put structure back in. You know, I mentioned earlier that all of the structure around a corporate environment went away. And I found out after the fact that this structure really was helpful. And so early on, I hated my friend, but then I got into a groove and we became really close friends. And as I got toward the end, I was like, wow, this is going to be over. It's going to leave a void. So I had to first come to grips with that relationship, but it was a cool thing. I mean, it lit my parents up just watching all the support, and it got them on social media to just follow the journey. Friends, family. So it brought me closer to a lot of people. And one of the really cool parts is, like, people that I had friendships with, but hadn't spoken to in years, reached out. Well, one way or another, we saw what you were doing. Let's connect for 20, 30 minutes. Love to hear how things are going. One of the great relationships was through a friend, an older gentleman who is also a 2-time cancer survivor, reached out, and we just connected, and he's been a great inspiration. So it just lit up so many other things, Brian. And I would say the flip side of that, there were some people that I don't know if I'm misinterpreting it, but it felt like maybe they were resentful a little bit because it was getting so much attention and energy. So it wasn't all great. And it revealed a couple of, I'd say, relationships that probably weren't as healthy. So there was that side of it as well.
Yeah. Welcome to the spotlight.
Yeah.
It reminds me of, we talk a lot about Napoleon Hill and declaring a clear and definite purpose, which 1 million jumps in 1 year is a very clear, very definite purpose. And it's amazing as you tell the story to see all of the pieces, like these concentric circles that are around you that included your physicality, relationship with the jumping, neighbors and relationships, marketing. The part where you said the relationships maybe weren't as healthy, that's an unexpected thing. I wouldn't have thought of that.
Yeah. It manifested in some odd ways. Just people that I spoke to regularly, like, just weren't responding, and less interaction. And it took me some real deep reflection to understand what could be contributing to that. The relationships weren't healthy enough to actually really have candid conversation about what might have been happening or what they were thinking from their end.
Let's look at the other side of that, because you and I had a conversation maybe a couple of weeks ago in prep for this. And I asked you, have you ever been so inspiring to others in your life? And you were like, wow, no, I haven't. And what I want every man to have the experience of is to do something that inspires other people. like so that he can understand what it's like to feel inspiring to others. You know, like Michael, you're a guy who for 30 years garnered a lot of respect in the corporate workspace, right? Like you went about your business, you did things the right way. Respect is different than being admired. Respect is different than being seen as someone who's inspiring. It's a very different kind of energy, right? And I would love to know, what were the differences that you felt from being respected, you know, for all that period of time to some of the energy you were receiving from people who were like, this is the most inspiring thing that I've seen done. Like, what felt different to you from their energy? And then what did that evoke inside of you as a result of feeling that?
In a corporate setting, I absolutely felt like I was respected. And I think I inspired people more at a episodic or individual level. So somebody would come and say, that talk we had was really helpful. I reflected, I did these things, and it had an impact on me. But it was one at a time type things. And the jumping was the first time it was like, I'm on the stage for everybody to watch the same performance. And so initially that was really uncomfortable for me. So I appreciated the admiration, but it just was something I had a hard time accepting. And the words of one of my close friends in the corporate setting, like when they were going to have a big party for me when I was leaving, I was like, that's not me. I don't want to do that. And he grabbed me literally by the shoulder and said, this might not be about you. This is about the people who want to say goodbye and give you a hug, literally or figuratively, because you mean something to them. And so as I tried to get comfortable with the discomfort of being on the stage, so to speak, with my jumping, those words kept ringing in my ears. This is not necessarily all about you. And so accepting that then lightened my load. And the difference I could feel joy from people, which was different than anything I felt in a corporate setting. Like when people talked about it with me, like you could see over video and some in person, like their faces would light up. It's inspiring. And that's the word I heard most. This really is inspiring to me. And that was, maybe it shouldn't have been, but it was a surprise for me more than anything else.
Has that changed your capacity for being admired or receiving that kind of praise?
I think I'm much more willing, Brian, to just accept it and say thank you.
Yeah.
In the past, I might have said, what I did wasn't really a big deal, or you did all the work. And while those are still true, sometimes I just say thank you. And I think not only does that feel better for me, but my perception is that feels better for the other people. They just want to express their gratitude and have you just say thank you. That just feels so good. And that's been a big shift for me.
Brian, we had that conversation when Keith was on the show, right? Where it was like, how come we can't accept praise? We always like deny it or we downplay it. And I mean, think about the metaphor of if you brought someone a gift and they only like kind of lukewarmly received the gift that like, you wanted to surprise them with, or like, oh, great, a new box of coffee, or, oh, great, like the new Eagles jersey, thanks. You would feel kind of hurt versus like when you give someone, if I were to give Michael an Eagles jersey and then Michael will go, oh my God, that's amazing. And he's going to wear it to the next game and, take pictures and then send it to me. That's like a full reception of the gift. Why is it any different when someone comes to you with praise? Like, Michael, I want you to know how inspiring you are. I want you to feel it. I want to see your heart open when I share that with you. To take it back to this point of, I really want every man to aspire to understand what it's like to inspire, and to inspire not just on those episodic levels like you talked about, but being on the stage where everyone can see. Because I know for me personally, and Bri, like you and I kind of went through this journey together when we started talking openly about some of our histories and, like your cancer survivorship, my sexual addiction. Neither of us wanted to talk about those on public stages, but when we did, we found that people were like, hey, you guys are inspiring. And when I felt that from others, what that did for me, and Michael, you nailed this, it woke me up to the fact that this is not about me. It's not nearly about me. It's like I have this duty and responsibility now to share more of myself, to be more courageous so that other people, other men can rise up and find like better versions of themselves as a result of it. So it's almost like this 1 + 1 = 1,000,000, kind of math. With all that said, I think what kind of could be a cool place to go to now, because we're like at this crescendo, you finish your 1,000,000 jump rope skips, you did it on New Year's Eve, You had this huge party, this huge celebration. I was there. A lot of guys from the mastermind were on Zoom watching. And then January 1st rolls around of 2021 and it's over. What was that day like and the days that were following?
I tried to prepare myself for that day, but I was woefully unprepared for that day. The first thing I had to get over was just like not planning my day around my jumps. Early on in 2020, I would jump first thing in the morning. And then as my body got more beat up, I was like, oh, now I'm going to jump later in the morning. I need a little bit more time to loosen up. And then that became later in the afternoon for a while. So, think about all of my habits around eating, when I was showering and doing all this, all shifted, everything focused around my jumping sessions. When when I would go to the grocery store, like everything, and then all of a sudden that was gone. And the first day I felt good because I was physically just exhausted and ready for that. But mentally it was like, wait a minute, I have to jump. No, I don't. And that probably lasted for a good week. And then I thought, I missed jumping and I started to do it. And then my body said, not ready for that yet. Between my knees and my calves and my shoulder, I needed the physical rest, but there was absolutely a void. And in some ways I'm still struggling with what to fill that void with. That's a regular structured thing that gives me that source of energy almost every day.
This is really important, man, because this transition, this void that you talk about, this shift from something that was like intense and at the center of your day and all these other decisions like were impacted by it, like when you ate, how you showered, all these kinds of things. I want to read a passage from David Dada's The Way of the Superior Man that I think hits really hard in this present moment. It's chapter 12, and the title of the chapter is called Be Willing to Change Everything in Your Life. A man must be prepared to give 100% to his purpose, fulfill his karma or dissolve it, and then let go of that specific form of living. He must be capable of not knowing what to do with his life, entering a period of unknowingness, and then waiting for a vision or a new form of purpose to emerge. These cycles of strong, specific action, followed by periods of not knowing what the hell is going on, are natural for a man who is shedding layers of karma in his relaxation into truth. Now, if you think about how metaphorical this is around some of your life experiences, and for the men who are listening, think about how this is metaphorical for your life experiences also. 1 million jump rope skips was a very defined, specific purpose that showed up every single day. And then January 1st, 2021, it's gone. And now there's the void. There's that nothingness and there's that uncertainty. There's that limbo. And it can feel deregulating because when you had that structure and now the foundation is gone, there could be an urgency or a race to try and fill that void. And you could end up filling that void with lesser purposes if we don't have that ability to actually just sit in the void in that period of unknowingness, like he talks about, to allow that next thing to emerge. You had something similar happen when you left your 30+ year corporate career. I remember, like you went and did you did a trip and it took you like 45 to 50 days to detox from like that speed of corporate. But then there was like a lull of not knowing where to place your energy or attention. So take these two experiences, Michael, that you've had of sitting in that not knowingness, that lull from something so definite for such an extended period of time to then it being gone. What have you learned from sitting in those experiences and what are you learning right now?
I would say the me prior to doing the inner work as a group with other men would have figured out something to try to immediately put in that void. And as I was getting closer to the end of the million jumps, I went down that default path. I thought, what am I going to do in 2021? And I started tinkering with maybe I'll do 10 million steps or I'll do this. And it just finally said, no, just let it come. Don't force it just to fill the void. So it was very conscious and I saw it coming versus when I left the corporate environment, it's a decision I made. Had a few months from the time I made the decision to the time I actually left. I went into it thinking, I want the void because I want no commitments and structure. I didn't know that I necessarily understood what I wanted, or what that void would look and feel like, but I was more welcoming of it. But it didn't feel good. After I got over that 45-day, I'm going to travel, I'm going to just do some things, I didn't know what to do with the void. And I think that was part of what spurred me to want to do something like jump a million times in 2020.
We hear this all the time, right? From other guys that are going through some sort of journey. We hear it most often in retirement. People have been they've been in the doing for so long, and then all of a sudden it's over. And what do we do on day one after it's over? And for the guys the older guys in my life that have been through that haven't done some of this inner work, it's a very scary period because they don't know what not doing is. This is true. I've been in relationships before that have lasted years. And what does day one after a relationship look like? And Michael, I know that's something you've been through also. What does day one look like after chemotherapy is over? Right? I know that's something that you've been through. And so I think one of the greatest gifts and joy about doing this inner work and finding that purpose is the ability to sit in it and to not have to be in the do.
That's massive, man, because Michael, like what you said about it doesn't feel good to sit in the void. I know that exact same feeling. It doesn't feel good because it's unfamiliar. Say if you've been running on a treadmill for like 3 hours and then you get off, like, your body's still kind of in motion. You feel out of whack. So it's an unfamiliar feeling. And then you can end up springing back into action and taking on lesser purposes, things that are unfulfilling, busy work, all that bullshit. The flip side of that is you sit in the void for a while and you let that discomfort build. And then you also let some clarity build as well. And then there's a desire, then there's an energy. And like you said, this 1 million jump rope thing birthed as a result of you sitting in that void. Well, now you're the most inspiring you've ever been in your life. Now you've raised $56,000 for charity that like is near and dear to your heart. It's brought you closer to your family. You've got keynote speeches that are going to come as a result of this, training programs that are going to come as a result of this. You could write a book on this because you had the patience and the capacity to sit in the void and allow that to build for a while. And I want every man to hear that because I know there are guys who are listening right now who are either approaching a void, who are sitting in a void where the label is, it's wrong, it's bad, I need to solve this, versus, no, man, I'm pulling back that slingshot right now so that I can actually like shoot forward into something that's purpose-driven, powerful, and passionate.
It can be a very frustrating place, right? That void. I was in that void after my last business. And if the belief is not there, that void is there for a reason, right? If the belief is just, I'm just not doing something and I don't know why, that is a scary, frustrating place to be. And we try to fill that void with anything that comes by. I know I was there. Luckily, I've been working with Dominic and the guys long enough to know that this is a natural thing. And even knowing that, it still was frustrating because I was ready on day 2. And I was ready on day 3, and I was ready on day 4. And when I found that in day more like 6 to 7 months, right, it felt addicting. Like I like that analogy, Dominic, of pulling back the slingshot because mine was as taut. It couldn't go. It felt like it couldn't go any further. And that's the feeling when you get to that point, you're like, now's the time to go. And it's very, very clear.
And your business is crushing it now, but you needed to go through that process. It's kind of like, you ever see someone who's like had a dog for 12 years, they love their dog, the dog dies, and then they go get a dog the next day? They skipped the whole grieving process, or someone who's been in a relationship forever, they get divorced, in a relationship the next day, like they skip that essential part of the, let's put one thing to an end, let that die, let it dissipate, let it dissolve, clear that energy, and then let something else emerge. If you just skip from one thing to the next, it's hardly ever as powerful as it could be.
And I'll posit, you can get better and better at this, right?
That's right.
Going through the process, you can get better at being in the void because the first time I was in the void, it's just like, all right, I'm going to wait. The universe is going to take care of me. So we are good. I am in the void. And then it didn't do anything and nothing came, right? So there are like very specific actions that you can take while in the void, such as giving yourself space. And ways to do that, meditation, talking to other guys in community, right? There's a lot of ways we can do this. So it's not just sitting in your family room cross-legged on your own.
I think, Brian, a key point for me, at least, that I want to make sure people think about is Like that is absolutely not a linear journey. Meaning there are days when I was comfortable sitting in the void and giving myself permission to not be productive in quotes that day. But then there were days when I filled it with what I call productive procrastination, like going through filing cabinets, resorting baseball cards that I had from when I was 7. Like they didn't need to be sorted, but I was busy that day. And the big shift for me happened when I stopped thinking about what do I want to do to the question, who do I want to be? And then it just, that ultimately, obviously, who you want to be results in what you do, but shifting the question in that way drove me to define what is it that I want to feel. And I leaned back on some of my corporate experiences, some of the experiences that I had along the way as I was doing my jumping journey. And those feelings, I was like, that's what I'm after. And now how do I fill that with things that check the feelings boxes that I was after? So it's a tough journey. And I would say, talk to people. The hard thing for me was to ask for and accept help, listening to people and being open to those things. So anybody who thinks you just figure it out one day is mistaken. It's a constant journey, and you absolutely get better at it, but only happens through reflection, creating perspective, and then ultimately awareness.
Michael, what made asking for help difficult?
That's a deep-seated one that I trace that root all the way through. I can't even find the beginning of it, but it always felt like weakness or vulnerability, asking for help. And sometimes you get offers of help without even asking, and saying no to those is just the other side of that same rough coin. And I learned that I began my pivot. I'm still on the path, but I began my pivot when I got divorced and I left. I had very little to my name, all of my possessions in a few trash bags, and didn't want to live with my parents more than a few weeks out of pride. And
how old are you?
At that point, early 30s.
And how old are you now?
54. And so I just was like, I have 3 young daughters. I want to be able to provide for them. I needed mental and financial help, and it just was forced to do it. And it was liberating because people wanted to help me. They wanted to be there for me. And accepting that help was a tremendous pivot in my life. It saved my life, not literally, but figuratively. Hey, Brian, I want to come back to one of the things you said earlier about retirement. If I had to do it over again, I would never call leaving my corporate world a retirement. There were 2 other people who were leaving at the same time, and they were older than me, and they were retiring. And I was just leaving because I wanted to chase some other dreams. And so as my boss wrote the communication, he said, do you mind if we just call this a retirement? It's hard to say these people are retiring and Michael's just leaving. And so I said, sure, it doesn't, I don't care. Well, if I had that one to do over again, I would never say that, because as people wish me good luck in my retirement, I was like, no, I'm not retiring. I'm just moving on to what's next in my life.
So that is so indicative of who you are, Michael. And one of the things that makes you inspiring to me is you're a 54-year-old man who has successfully completed a 3-decade corporate career, financially secure, married 3 young women who have been raised and out of the house. Like for most people, that's a life. That's it. It's a mission accomplished and would be now fading off into the sunset. The way that you show up is you're just getting started, man. Right? You're diving into this inner work. You're launching your own business. You're attracting coaching clients. You're leading workshops in corporate places. And so I would just love to know, what is your life philosophy and how do you view these coming decades, this next chapter of your life?
I feel like I've been given a gift through my experiences. The type of leukemia I had, if I had been diagnosed with that in even the 80s, I would have had a very short lifespan after that. So it sounds cliche, but I truly view every day as a gift, and I want to give back as much as possible. And my philosophy is it doesn't take sometimes much more than tilting somebody's head a few degrees for them to view things differently or make subtle shifts in their life that make a big difference. And the analogy I use is that if you have a ship and it's pointed in a direction, you can predict where it's going to go. But if you shift that direction a few degrees, over time, it winds up in a very different place. And I want to be a person who helps people shift their head and gain that awareness and perspective. And so I'm trying to do that through my business, but I try to do it in every interaction that I have. My daughters probably would grin and say, "Dad, you're doing it again." And when I had my bon voyage for my corporate environment, I was fortunate enough that my wife and family were there. And as some of the people gave speeches and they heard some of the same types of things that I had been preaching to them over the course of time. And my one daughter said, "You never shut up about this stuff at work either." And so I just want to continue down that path.
When your family said, "There you go, doing it again," what specifically was that? What were you doing again?
Trying to help always find the nugget or lesson in whatever happens to you, because it's those individual day-to-day interactions that you collect the wisdom and knowledge from, and you piece it all together. And the downside is that when people are around me too often, they just say, "Dad, just let me be mad," or just let me be. I don't need a lesson right now. I don't want it.
So that comment came from both love and frustration. Got it.
Exactly. Love and frustration. So that hug gets a little too tight toward the end. But just to continue to build those nuggets. And so that's what I'm after in life.
That's awesome, man. And this conversation has been super inspiring. I love being able to kind of like unpack a story over the course of an entire conversation. We went really deep on your 1 million jump rope skip journey. And it's such a metaphor, I think, for so many other men who are looking at what is that big project I can take on? What is that big, what's that Mount Everest I can climb? Or maybe even some, scaled down version of that in your own life. So if someone's been inspired by you, man, are you doing one-on-one coaching? And if so, like who's your ideal client? Like who are you looking to serve specifically?
Yes, I am doing one-on-one coaching. And my ideal client is somebody who is in or considering a big transition in life. So maybe somebody going from a corporate or a work environment to phase 2 or the next phase of their life. Young adults who are considering, like, what do I want to be when I grow up? I haven't really thought about it. I need direction. So it's people who are in that transition mindset, I think, are most receptive and ready to hear what I have to say and offer.
And I'll say, if anybody's looking to sit down with someone that can provide a beautiful reflection of like where you might be. I know, Michael, you looked at my eyes a couple times and told me something that's had a big impact on my life. At least I know on 2 occasions I can think of off the top of my head. So if there's anybody out there looking for someone that can be that listener and then reflect some wisdom, Michael's your guy.
Thanks, Brian.
We started the conversation today. You've always been really, really precise around the things that I do that you value, and you make sure that I know it. So you speak to these things that bring out my king. And then you're also great at gently, but very directly delivering times where maybe I missed the mark or there's like, there's a blind spot. So I value both of those. I think any coach worth their salt has to be able to navigate both of those. You do that really effectively. I will, in the show notes, put your contact info. So if anyone wants to reach out to you, any other place that you want to direct these folks to?
If people are interested in just seeing some of the silly videos of my jumping, my Instagram is at MICHJ Young. And then website is called timeforbold.com.
Cool, man. I'm going to put all those in the show notes.
Michael, something I've been wanting to ask you just really quick here is, how are your calves? Have they become more defined? Are they bigger? What's your calf situation?
My calves have become so well defined that they're like, it looks like gristle on a bone.
Wow. So this is what's your background ethnicity? Like, are you Irish or what are you?
Irish Italian.
Irish Italian. Okay. See, I'm English and Irish, and I have a theory that my calves are not defined at all. They're very straight, but that's because my ancestors rode horses all the time, and they probably didn't have to run around or jump rope for that matter. So it's good to know that it's possible because you have some of those Irish genes in you. My calves might look gristled like yours one day if I took on 1 million jumps.
Yes, I think you start to get there though, Brian, around the 600,000. So you don't have to necessarily go all the way to 1 million.
I wish you said 6. Awesome, man.
All right, gentlemen, it's time to take action. This was a very inspiring conversation with Michael Young on the anatomy of how to execute on a massive challenge. I'm sure that you are inspired, as am I, to implement something that you learned from this conversation with Michael. What is one insight, one aha, one action that you will be putting into practice right away in the next coming days? Something that makes sure that this just doesn't stay as an intellectual exercise. And when you come up with that thing, please let us know, share it in the Great Man Within Facebook group, or also you can always write us a rating and review. We love that. And let us know the action that you're inspired to take from this particular episode.